Hi all, welcome back. This has to be my most requested topic. My original comparison video, which pinned the Artist Mix versus the S3, was by far my most watched video, so it only made sense to compare the new S1 to the tried and true S3. Let's get started. As a disclaimer, the functionality discussed in this video pertains to Pro Tools. While both the S1 and the S3 both will work with different DAWs and other Yukon-enabled programs like video editors, I can't personally speak to 100% compatibility of these functions. First, we're going to take a look at the S3, and then we'll take a look at the S1. But since the S3 is a 16 fader control surface and the S1 is only 8 faders, let's compare apples to apples and compare the S3 to two S1s. First, let's take a look at the S3. It's a 16 fader control surface originally designed for live sound and then later adapted to work in the studio using the same Yukon protocol as the Artist Series, Dock, and S1. Because it was built to be on the road, it's got an all-metal chassis and it's built like a tank. It's also designed to be an audio interface using AVB, which is Audio Video Bridge. That's an Ethernet-based audio transfer. It's important to note that AVB is only supported on Macs running OS X 10.9 and higher, and other specific AVB-compatible switches may be needed as well. So while the S3 is an audio interface that's really past the scope of this video will cover more of a comparison between the S3 and S1 as Yukon control surfaces. But the audio interface really can't be ruled out of the equation if you have a use for it. Now let's take a look at some of the functions that are similar between these devices. They both enable you to control various functions like EQ, dynamics, input and output assignments, sends, track banking and nudging, insert/plugin controls, and fader flip. If you're not familiar with fader flip, it's a function that will swap whatever parameters are assigned to the channel fader and the rotary encoder and flip them. So whatever parameter was on the fader gets temporarily assigned to the rotary encoder, and whatever parameter was on the rotary encoder gets assigned to the fader. This could be very handy for complex automation moves that would normally be a challenge on a rotary encoder. Getting back to our comparison, both control surfaces offer a foot switch input, which offers functionality like talkback if you have an interface that supports it, and transport playback and record options. One thing I'd like to note on the S3 is that in order to edit Dynamics plugins using the left-hand function buttons, you'll also have to press the Surface Shift button while pressing the Dynamics function button, since Insert Control is the default function. You can work around this by selecting Dynamics from the set of function buttons located at the top of the S3, which will utilize the top row of rotary encoders. More on this later, because we can actually use this to our advantage while mixing. On the newer S1, Avid included both Dynamics and Insert Control on the first layer, making these two common mixing functions easy to navigate. Now let's take a look at each surface's channel strip and see what they have in common. They both have OLED displays that will show you track name, basic metering, and the value of the parameter assigned to the rotary encoder directly below it. Next to each rotary encoder are select and in buttons for assigning different parameters. Moving down the channel strip, we see both have solo and mute buttons, and below that are full-size 100mm touch-sensitive motorized faders, along with select and record enable/automation mode change buttons. While we're looking at the channel strips, let's talk about some of the changes that were made from the S3. First is the new location of the select and record enable buttons on the S1. These were moved up out of the way of normal fader position to make them more accessible, which was a great idea. Second is the location of the track color indicator. The S3 indicates track color with a small LED above the OLED display. On the newer S1, the track color indicator is located below the fader, and it's also a user-assignable soft key. Third was the removal of the track meters, which were found on the S3, but unfortunately absent on the S1. I understand if this was a cost-cutting decision, but it still would have been nice to carry this feature over to the S1. However, in defense of this decision, the metering while using a tablet or iPad as a meter bridge blows away the S3 style surface meters. Now would also be a good time to mention though that the S1 and the S3 now offer metering on your computer monitor via the Avid Control desktop app. If you haven't checked it out already, you should definitely try it out. One other thing that was not carried over from the S3 is the touch strip. I can't really say that I miss it. I honestly prefer buttons over the touch strip anyway, and their position on the S3 made them prone to inadvertent touches. So let's talk about some more differences between these two control surfaces. The one thing the S3 does have over the S1 though is the second row of rotary encoders. By utilizing a combination of the top function buttons and the left-hand function buttons, it's possible to display the EQ parameters on one row of encoders and dynamics plugins on the second row of encoders, which can be really handy while mixing. Additionally, the S3 has 23 reprogrammable buttons, along with 4 touch-sensitive areas on the touch strip, as opposed to the S1, which has 8 reprogrammable buttons. On the lower left-hand side of the S3, there are 6 of these buttons pre-configured for layout recall. There are additional user buttons and OK and cancel buttons as well. I'd like to take this time to compare this with the S1 user programmable buttons. The lower S1 user buttons come pre-configured to recall layouts 1 through 8 using the shift layer. An example, if you hold down the surface shift button while pressing the buttons, it will recall your first 8 layouts. It's important to note that if you have multiple S1s, you can't program 16 unique commands. Whatever you have configured for buttons 1 through 8 will be duplicated across all S1 surfaces. I'd love to see this change in the future. Finishing off the lower left-hand side of the S3 are OS modifier buttons such as Shift, Alt, Control, and Command, or Windows key. These are also found on the first 4 user buttons of the S1. On the right-hand side of the S3, below the bank buttons, are 2 buttons pre-configured to recall View 1 and View 2, which you can set in Pro Tools. Below the View buttons are arrow buttons, which can zoom your session horizontally and your track height vertically. On the lower right, there are 8 buttons plus a 9 through 16 key, which effectively doubles those buttons. These come pre-configured to change automation modes on a selected track. Below the automation mode buttons is a solo clear button, and next to that is the touch strip with 4 user programmable touch-sensitive areas. Now let's talk about feel. How do the faders and knobs feel under your hand? It might just be me, but in a side-by-side comparison, I find the faders on the S3 and dock have a bit less friction than the faders on the S1. I personally like this better, but in the middle of mixing, it's never really crossed my mind. Conversely, I find the knobs on the S3 have a bit more friction than on the S1. I happen to like this better. For whatever reason, I feel they're less prone to inadvertent adjustments if I happen to graze across them. Make no mistake though, the knobs on the S1 have a much better, more robust feel than their retired counterpart, the Artist Mix. The knobs on the Artist Mix has always felt a little flimsy to me, and the S1 definitely solves that. Now let's talk about size. Let's compare apples to apples. The S3 measures 28 inches wide by 14.25 inches deep, or approximately 71.12 centimeters by 36.2 centimeters, while 2 S1s measure 24.81 inches wide by 15 inches deep, or approximately 63 centimeters by 38 centimeters. So, 2 S1s side by side to create a 16-channel control surface looks just as nice as one S3, and it's actually 3.2 inches, or 8.1 centimeters narrower, so it's going to take up less horizontal real estate on your desk. Conversely, 2 S1s run deeper than an S3 by about 3/4 of an inch, or approximately 1.2 centimeters, which means you may need a deeper desk to accommodate the S1s, and even more so if you intend to use a tablet as a meter bridge. I estimate you'll need an additional 1 inch, or approximately 2.5 centimeters in depth to accommodate the tablets. Now let's talk about expandability. The S1 was originally designed to be a companion to the Avid dock, and therefore built with a modular concept in mind, which has a lot of benefits. For instance, up to 4 S1s plus a dock can be used together to create a large 33 fader mixing surface with the Avid Control app at the heart. An S3 configuration will only allow for the addition of a dock plus Avid Control. No other fader controls can be added. Now let's talk about pricing. 2 S1s will set you back about $2,600, while one S3 will set you back about $5,000. You could actually add 3 S1s plus 3 Amazon Fire HDs for the meter bridge and still pay less than one S3. Of course, a better use of your money would be two S1s and one dock, but that's just my opinion. So now you have to ask yourself, is the different functionality in a non-expandable 16 fader control surface that you get with the S3 really worth it? Perhaps only if you really need the AVB audio interface. Or maybe there's more to it than that. I have to be honest, I like using the S3. The build quality is amazing, and less friction on the faders while mixing just feels better to me. But that doesn't mean I don't like the S1. These units are also well built, and when you stick a tablet on top of them as a meter bridge, it just takes mixing to a whole new level. I love being able to see the large meters and track colors, and again, the reconfiguration of the function buttons with dynamics and inserts on layer 1 is a huge help. In fact, if I was not lucky enough to get my hands on this S3, I would have been perfectly happy with two S1s and never have known the difference. More importantly, I would have never even considered the S3 because of its price point. I just can't justify it for what I do when I know the S1s fill my need completely. So I've laid out all the similarities and differences I can think of between these two control surfaces. So now I bring this back to my original question. Which one is right for you? Unfortunately, I can't answer that question for you. Both of these units are fantastic mixing tools. You'll be happy with either one of them, but weigh each one side by side and really think about what features are important to you, your mixing environment, and perhaps your future needs. I'd just like to thank everyone for watching. If you got this far, I hope it helped steer you in either direction. Whichever path you choose, you're going to be happy because these are both great control surfaces. Even if you don't go with any of these, you should still be using Avid Control because it's free and it's jam-packed with functionality and it's constantly being updated. So, as always, if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. If you have any questions or would like me to cover anything specific, leave it in the comments below, and thanks for watching.